Good evening. If you're watching this, you're either tuned in for the premiere, or you're a patron/YouTube member. I've decided to do these Q&As for the patrons, which you can participate in by joining Moon Channel's Patreon. I'll be airing them after each premiere, and of course you can always find them on Patreon proper. Please forgive me the minimal editing for the Q&A. Let's get started. Lulu1997 Master asks, thoughts on the Game Freak Terra leak? Well, it's certainly a terrible leak. It's the kind of thing that might cause one to lose one's sovereignty, especially given how protective Nintendo can be. The consequences on the legal side remain to be seen. I'm hesitant to talk too much about it for now. I will say there's a song that was leaked that sounds a lot like Shiawase no Monosashi by Maria Takeuchi. You know the one, right? Goes something like this. Count what you have now, don't count what you don't have, find that you have so much. The backing track I just sung over is the leaked song. Kinda wish they stuck with it. I hope we don't get in trouble for this. Lulu also asks, what inspired you to create this channel? I started Moon Channel during the pandemic as I wanted to keep myself busy during all the downtime. My first few videos were recorded on an old microphone and they were almost like diary entries, right? But the vision was always to make wholesome content that was perhaps a little bit better informed. Law and social studies are topics that I have intimate knowledge of, and I felt that I could talk about these with some degree of authority. Really, the channel description says it all. I couldn't find the videos I wanted to watch, and so I sought out to make videos that are serious without being anxiety-inducing, mature without being condescending, and wholesome without being overbearing. I don't always succeed at those goals, mind you. I was a little bit mean-spirited towards Sony in this video, and honestly, I'd like to stay away from that a little bit more in future videos. But that's the idea, at least. Finally, Lulu asks, what is/are the biggest misconceptions in regards to law and video games you see floating around the web? What is the most annoying one to you? The biggest misconception, I think, is that there are corporate good guys who really care about your rights as fans and that there are corporate bad guys who are looking to crush the little guy, when in truth all of it is rather cynical corporate calculus. If tomorrow there was some concrete proof that emerged showing that being very open with your IP rights was objectively and conclusively the best way to maximize profit, and there was no fear of losing any IP rights in the process, every company would switch to that behavior. Because the goal is always profit maximization. Do not mistake human empathy for the cold, cynical pragmatism of publicly traded corporations. If you do, you are as a fish on a hook and have taken their bait. Their shareholder value matters, and you matter only as much as you can contribute to that value. Up next is SuperBro64, one of the channel's earliest supporters. Hello, my friend. SuperBro asks, you probably mentioned this at some point, but if you played through all the Ace Attorney games, what case is your favorite? Which character? Do you have any thoughts on how Capcom and Shu Takumi explore the Japanese judicial system in the series? If you ever played Apollo Justice, what do you think about Christoph Gavin? Lovely questions, SuperBro. I might need to put a question limit in the future just for brevity's sake, but thank you for asking all of these. I've not played through all the Ace Attorney games. In fact, I've only actually really played completely through the first one in its entirety. My love of Ace Attorney comes almost entirely from Pearly, who was really into Ace Attorney. I love any case involving Maya, who is also my favorite character and reminds me of both of my sisters, but my middle sister in particular. I have a whole video actually on Ace Attorney in the Japanese judicial system. It's one of the prototype videos, and you can watch it free of monetization. As for Christoph, I know of him, but I never played Apollo Justice. If Pearly's around for the premiere, maybe she'll let me know her thoughts and I'll share them with you in the chat or on Patreon later. Deleted asks, how much, if at all, do you play modern Pokemon? And if you do you still enjoy it? I do still play the modern Pokemon games, and I do enjoy them very much, though time constraints mean that I seldom have time to finish the games. Of the recent Pokemon games, I've played Scarlet, Shining Pearl, Shield, Let's Go Eevee, and Moon. Of those games, I beat only Moon, I think. I lived for a little while in Honolulu, so that game is special to me. Also, it's Moon. You know, I like the Moon theme if you haven't noticed already. Next up is TGVA Bababajo, who asks, what originally made you interested in law? B-Rob asks a similar question. What interested you in the profession or led you to entering into it professionally? To be honest with you, nothing at all. I didn't originally intend to get into law, but I was a smart kid who wasn't good at math, and law was the thing to do for such kids. I think that's a story you'll hear from a lot of lawyers, and is also the worst reason to go to law school. There was also some familial pressure and incentive. If I could go back in time, I might choose a different route and see where it goes. But now that I'm here, I'm glad I did it, and can use my legal training to make a difference in the world. Sunny Guan asks, as a progressive Christian, I would like to hear about your faith journey. Well, when I was a child, I spoke and thought and reasoned as a child. But when I grew up, I put away childish things. I was raised Christian, and I went to the same church as Mr. Donald Trump when I was very young. And I grew up in a household that flirted with the idea of Pentecostal evangelical Christianity, as I think was largely the case amongst Protestant Christian households in the 90s. But I've always been a very sensitive soul. In middle school and high school, the go-to insult for every situation was to call someone gay. Oh, that's so gay, you're so gay, etc. And whenever someone used those words, I could occasionally see out of the corner of my eye that a different person might shrink a little bit. That shrinking feeling, it's the same one that I felt when I was singled out for my differences, which is to say my ethnicity. The first line of my answer comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 13 of the Bible. And in this chapter, we are taught that love is patient, love is kind, that love doesn't demand its own way, that it does not rejoice about injustice, that of faith, hope, and love, the greatest of these things is love. I believe in a loving God. I believe that of faith, hope, and love, we are asked to rely most upon love. That when quandaries of faith or policy emerge, we should err in favor of love, the love that Christ has taught us as our guide. And Christ loved the marginalized and stood up for them against their persecutors. It requires enormous cognitive dissonance, in my opinion, to call oneself a Christian guided by Christ's love, and yet hate people for their God-given differences, for the very things that make them beautiful. I've been an LGBT ally since a time when saying such was enough to cause ostracization. I helped to organize the Day of Silence at my high school way back when that alone was enough to invite lambast. My entire life, I've seen Christians casting stones imagining themselves without sin. But I believe with my whole heart that to live into Christ's example of love means loving those whom the world's Pharisees inflict their self-righteousness and prejudice upon. That it means loving others for the differences that God gave them, and gave you, and gave me. Sorry for getting so preachy. Next up is Gabriel. Gabriel, funny coincidence that. Hi Mooney, I'm very interested in what your writing process is like. I've been writing a lot of papers for a class recently, and it made me think about how you construct your video essays. For me, I have trouble working with outlines. I will have main points I want to get into my head as I work, but your videos are so long sometimes. I would think there needs to be some sort of roadmap. Do you have a method for planning out the points in the stories you tell? I hope that makes sense. I'm just curious about your writing process, I guess. A lawyer needs to write a lot. The uniform bar exam, for example, requires one to write no less than 6 essays in one go on different legal topics, each of which is a few pages long. The script for the video you just watched, It's a Pal World, is 30 single-spaced pages long, give or take, about 10,000 words. It took me 3 days to write that script. The anime propaganda video was about 80 pages long and 26,000 words. That took me about a month. The longer a researched script gets, the more time it requires due to the organization of it. Really, the hard part isn't the writing, the hard part is knowing what to cut, because there's so much one can write about. My advice for outlines is, if they don't work for you, don't use them, or rethink what an outline actually is. You don't have to do what Harvard does just because it's what you're taught. I seldom use outlines in my writing. I can sort of picture what I want to say already, and my writing is almost entirely stream of consciousness, hence all the little anecdotes and things. But if while writing I feel I am getting off topic, I'll draft a short outline that revolves tightly around the thesis of the video to help keep me from wandering away from the point. Long outlines, I find, don't help in the ways I need them to, which is keeping me locked into the points and guiding my stream of consciousness, while also allowing me to be creative and free-flowing in my writing. What I will sometimes do is draft tentative chapter titles first, and then write to fill them, changing them as I go along. That's about all the outline I need, for the most part. The last video I made a complete outline for was the Christian Games video, and I don't think I've needed to make one ever since. Next up is Kuyakoi, a Moonutic tier patron. Koi, my friend, it is good to hear from you. For the Q&A, what got you into video games and how do you balance working with gaming on top of everything else that goes on in your life? Life hasn't always been easy, and I turned to video games from a very early age, like many of you I suspect, as a form of escapism. It is precisely because there is so much going on in my life that I turned to gaming on occasion to step away from said goings-on. I was taught my whole life that video games are a waste of time, a simple and obvious evil. But I strongly disagree with that notion. As I hope Moon Channel can show, video games are like any medium of art, and they can teach and grow and develop and nurture as any art and play can do. Look, video games aren't perfect, but people get toxic about sports and pretentious about art as well. It is what you make of it, and I, for one, think video games can be not just good, but wholesome. As for balance, I don't play many video games anymore. I don't have a very good work-life balance, but I'm working on it. Koi also asks, how do you know when to stop digging down a rabbit hole when researching? I often don't, I think, as is evident. I dig as deep as I feel the brain wants to dig, and then I go back and I cut. Rabbit holes are endless, and everyone deals with them in different ways. I think it was CGP Grey who compared the rabbit holes to some kind of endless forest of knowledge or something. I don't personally consider it all that carefully. I rely on the Reggie method for script rabbit holes. If the game isn't fun, then why bother? If the rabbit hole is interesting, we'll go down it, and if it stops being fun and interesting because we're getting away from ourselves, we will come back up and move forward. I judge that as best as I am able and learn from everyone's complaints in the comments. Hanahata, a Moon Channel Nightingale, asks, how well do you think fair use could apply to Silva Gunner? Very well, I'd say. I actually brought it up a bit in the last video, completely by coincidence I might add, and I might make a video about this in the future. But Silva Gunner's work is parody and transformative. I like to use Silva Gunner rips to reinforce the transformative nature of the parodies. It's not just about the music, it's about the art. We'll explore that in more detail for a future video, I suspect, so I'm going to hold off from giving a very detailed answer here. Next up, it's Wishmakers. Wishmakers! Wishmakers asks, hey Mooney, how do you think it would be possible to fight back against an invasively monetized internet? Maybe it's too late to be asking this question in 2024, but I want to believe it isn't too late to try. That's a tough question. You know, the more the internet gets privatized, particularly by publicly traded profit-maximizing corporations, the more it must become monetized to satisfy the ever-increasing demands and appetites of the shareholders. It's never too late to fight against these dynamics, but that might require you lending your resources and manpower to advocacy groups, writing to your congresspeople and organizing. Think the JRPG video, right? To fight the false gods, you need to start at level 1. It's never too late. Jackadak asks, have you ever had a moment somewhere where you were mistaken for the other YouTube channel Moon? Whenever I talk about you on Reddit, there always seems to be someone that mistakes who I'm talking about, unfortunately. Mistake me for someone else? Me? The famous YouTuber, clueless lawyer, and the guy who voiced that one video on Did You Know Gaming? Impossible. Look, when I made Moon Channel, I had no idea that it would get anything close to this big. My initial dream was like 1,000 viewers. Total. I didn't think that hard about branding, or the future of the channel, or anything like that. And I still treat Moon Channel more or less just like a pet project, right? To top it off, my knowledge of the YouTube space is almost zero, and my knowledge of wider social media is zero. I made a Twitter account for Moon Channel because I was told I was supposed to, and I've never used it to do a single thing, so. I'm not sure who Other Moon is, but judging from your question, I don't suspect that I'd find the content altogether pleasant. But it's alright. I let the character of my content speak to the content of my character, and perhaps in time, there will no longer be confusion as a result. Wendy Zhang asks, hi Mooney, my question for you is how do you actually find the time to be a lawyer and research high-quality videos at the same time? What does your typical timeline look like? The simple short answer is that I don't find the time. For the Who Runs Pokemon video, I pulled 3 all-nighters in 1 week editing that video to make sure that I could get it out before taking a vacation. Timeline-wise, it takes me between 3 days to 1 week to write and research most of the scripts. The really long scripts like JRPG, Korean gacha, anime propaganda, those take well over a month, and I'll be scribbling notes and stuff all throughout the year as well, in the lead-up to those videos. I'm scribbling notes as we speak for How Communist is Hoyo Anyway, which is going to be the next big video. The recording takes about 1 to 3 days depending on the video length. Sometimes you can hear me losing my voice as we get later into a video, like this one. which I'm recording at the end of my recording session for the prior video. The editing then takes a week or two, sometimes 3. I'm not a very good editor, and the process is quite difficult, so at times I can only get like a minute of final footage editing done per hour of labor, depending on the subject matter. T-Man asks, you have a few videos about contentious topics. These videos are often received positively, but also sometimes generate backlash. How much do you like making videos about serious things? Do you have a lot of passion for it inherently, or would you not be making as many videos about heavy topics if they weren't so popular? I'll be honest with you, a lot of the so-called heavy topics end up being the channel's least popular videos. I don't make videos on those topics because they're popular, quite the opposite tends to be true. But I do think that it is important to talk about these so-called controversial topics and to communicate in spite of the taboo around them. Communication is healthy, it's how we grow an empathetic society, and thus a better world. And if we're too afraid to communicate like adults, then these critically important topics will be filled with the bickering of children. So to answer the question simply, I do have a passion that leads me to address these heavier topics in what I hope is mostly a gentle, compassionate, and wholesome way. T-Man follows that up with, the serious videos are often pretty popular video ideas with the audience, as people often just want to hear voices talk about them in any capacity. Have you worried that relying on popularity as a metric to judge videos might funnel you into making more videos that are more serious and heavy in tone than you originally set out to make? Really great questions, T-Man. In hindsight, I'm kind of unsure though about what you mean by more serious or heavy in tone. The Pokemon Showdown video is one of the channel's biggest hits, and it's extremely goofy. The more serious Cake Gamer's Feminism video, which in hindsight I wish I had done differently, was not a big hit. This year's Pride Month video was one of the worst performing of any of the channel's videos, but you can bet we'll get another one next year because that's an important cause to me. I care deeply about my trans viewers and friends. I do lean into popularity polls a bit, but that's not because I care so much about how many views the videos get per se. It's more that I want to make stuff that you like, because I like you and want to make what you enjoy. Let me know if that answers your question, my friend. I'll offer a follow-up response on Patreon if I may have misunderstood something. Jacob Vestergramkow is next. Jacob, your comments on Patreon about Sony really resonated with me. Although as a lawyer, dry snark comes somewhat naturally, this kind of mean-spirited snark is not me, honestly. And I appreciate you pointing that out. Patreon can be a moral compass sometimes, and I really, really am grateful for that. Hi Mooney, says Jacob. I have a question related to the stuff you've talked about concerning copyright laws. If this kind of laws are neither beneficial for the consumers nor the copyright holders, then why does it seem like there haven't been any efforts from companies themselves to try and get more lax and comprehensive laws that could be more broadly beneficial? I might make a video on this in the future, but I'll direct you to the Copyright Office's 9th Triennial Rulemaking proceeding under the DMCA, wherein the Copyright Office consults the public and advises the Librarian of Congress on any proposed exemptions to the DMCA. This is where the change is ostensibly supposed to occur, but it's like polishing a turd. No matter how much you polish it, it remains a turd. Wider sweeping change needs to be made, as any change that occurs within the framework as it is written is so scary that you even have the music, film, and appliance industries objecting to, say, the allowance of multiple players using one archival copy of a game. The other problem is that there is a tug-of-war of sorts. The producers might want to pull the law more strict, in the manner of Japan. The consumer advocates want to pull the law more lenient. Either would be beneficial to all of the fan game makers and such as we've seen. But as the tug is ongoing, we're stuck in the middle. Congress ostensibly is supposed to represent the people and make the call, but they don't, and thus, they won't. Penultimate question, Barnaby asks, do you prefer aliens or dinosaurs? Look, I loved dinosaurs when I was a kid. Who doesn't? I'm ride or die Ankylosaurus. But as a Mass Effect player who stayed monogamous to Liara through all 3 Mass Effects, I'm going to go with aliens. There could be alien dinosaurs, you know, it's just a bigger subset, right? More possibilities. And finally, Barnaby's second question, the last of this first Q&A. From my friend, has anyone ever made fun of your shoes? Yes, actually. Just recently even, I was in Italy, at the beachside near Lake Garda, attending a private event. The attire is beach attire, and so I wore a pair of new flip-flops I got. A friend of mine cracked a joke about my lovely flip-flops, but the joke is really on them, as I happen to think that they're perfect. Here's a real photo of my new flip-flops. I think you'll agree, they have a certain je ne sais quoi about them, or you and I'll say, if you will. Thank you all for your wonderful questions. I apologize for not being on Patreon to hang out as much as I'd like, but I'm working on a Discord for all of us, so we'll get there eventually. If you are tuned in for the premiere, thank you for watching. This went way longer than expected, but I hope it was still fun. Thank you for tuning in to Moon Channel. I'll see you on Patreon or for the next premiere.